Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week joining us from the Netherlands is Thomas van Zuijlen. Did I pronounce your name correct?
100%.
All right. Well, that was a bit scary for me because I think it's the first time I pronounce your surname in the show. That was tough. So, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a big deal for me.
All right. Well, we are very happy that you accepted the invitation to come on the show. Thomas is an independent Scrum Master and workshop facilitator from the Netherlands. He believes in self-organization, empiricism, and facilitation will save the world of work. That's a good addition. Mm-hmm. A former developer and occasional quiz master at the local pub, I'm guessing, with 15 years of experience. In which of these? I don't know. Maybe the quiz master. Thomas operates in the Netherlands and Lithuania. And he's got a weekly newsletter you should all check on practical agility that can be found at TheBacklog, all one word, TheBacklog.cc. And we'll put the link on the show notes so that people can easily find it. So, Thomas, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Thank you very much, Vasco. So after that cool introduction, I want to emphasize how much of a quiz master I really am. But to be honest, it's only a sideline or a side business. I had a bit of a winding path getting to where I am now, because I started out being a political scientist, but then deviated and started working in the internet industry. So from the early 2000s, I've been in software development or web development specifically. And I found my niche at the time as a front-end developer. And as a front-end developer, since 2010, I think I was in different Scrum teams. And originally, I didn't really care about Scrum or any sort of process. I just wanted to do development work and be left alone mostly. But over the years, that kind of changed to the point that I realized that I wanted to do more of the stuff that was going on around development. So talking with other people on my team, the backenders, we needed to come to an agreement to go further, and testers helped me see stuff that I didn't know before. And I thought, you know what, what's the constant in all of this? And I realized it was Scrum. And I figured out that, hey, actually I kind of look up to some of the Scrum Masters that I've worked with. And I still do. And I thought, I have a little bit of swagger. I could talk to people outside the team as well, because that's what I thought it was. Maybe I should give this a go. So, of course, that went terribly wrong. It was a horrible assumption, but it was, a mistake that I'm very happy that I made, because I thought it was one thing, and then it ended up being so much of so many things at the same time.
And so much like an more, ocean right?
To swim in. Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. So I try to tell people always at parties, I'm not a great party guest, because I always want to talk about Scrum, and then I want to talk about the more that you do with it, or the more that you realize, the more you realize that there's so little that you know, right? Or something like that. And I find that beautiful, and I think it's perfectly suited to the way of working with complex environments.
And if your goal is to save the world of work, there's a lot to learn, no matter how much you've learned already, right?
Oof, yes, that's a good one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Thomas, all of that excitement and enthusiasm, of course, I bet followed you from the early days. And sometimes in the early days, we do things that we didn't know yet were wrong. And that's okay, because failure is part of the journey. We all go through that. All of our guests so far, and that's nearly 400 guests right now, have shared a story of failure with us. And that's what we want you to share. And I know it's tough, but it is something we all learn from. And we'll dissect the details at the end. But first, tell us that story, Thomas.
I used to work, or I still do, I work as an independent Scrum Master. And that means that I get hired on, right? So I freelance. And a couple of years ago, I was asked to be essentially a Scrum Master to an organization that was a startup that had been growing. So they were now going to be a scale up, and they noticed that, so they were in the, let's say, the hotel booking industry. And things were going quite well. There was lots to do. This was just prior to the pandemic, which also marked the end of my involvement, of course. But we're not there yet. So they were the hotel booking industry, and they were scaling up a little bit, and they noticed that there was some slowing down going on within their organization. So previously they had moved fast and broken things, to use a phrase, but now they were not breaking so many things anymore, and they really wanted to do to sort of align their processes. And they thought, okay, let's get someone with my kind of background. And sure enough, I came in, and about 6 months later, I went again. And the failure in that is that nothing much happened in between. I didn't move the needle in any way, I think, over there. And so the failure is not a catastrophic one in this sense that everything exploded, or I tried to force things on people, which also could be a terrible mistake. That none of that happened, but not much of anything else happened either. So my goal as a Scrum Master is usually to instigate some sort of conversation or thought process around continuous improvement, and that didn't happen over there.
So when you look back, like what are the, first of all, maybe we should talk about your expectations going in, right? Like, so that we can set the stage here for what actually happened. So as you got hired, what did you think you were going to be able to do in that particular organization?
That's a super good question that I didn't explicitly talk about with the people there. That was like a mistake. So that was already one of my learnings from that. But to answer your question, my expectation was that there I could work with a group of teams. Like they had, I think, 4 or 5 teams that all developed different parts of their product. And I thought, okay, I'll be working alongside each of them and trying to see, okay, how can we make use of the cadence that we have, and how can we then start doing more vertical slicing, so to speak, right? So where you have end-to-end value that you're striving for. And also to talk to the, let's say, the founders or the leadership about what they can do to set the stage, or to frame the possibilities for teams to work in that way. But I quickly noticed that nobody was really there waiting for me. So it's kind of a Dutch expression.
So you got there and they looked at you and said, "What is this person doing here?" Is that is that the feeling you got?
That's exactly it. And so that it's always difficult to meet a team where they're at, right? So I'm trying to do that, so not to impose too much or something, to prioritize pull over push. But in this case, nobody had been informed. I think maybe 3 people out of the 40 working there, and nobody had been informed that I came there, and nobody particularly cared or had any questions at that stage. And because everybody was working silently, because it was mostly in one large room, this was a co-located location and office, I was able to just also sit there and do stuff, but it was really hard to break that silence, literally. So there was an extra level of difficulty. And it took quite a while to get sort of an entry point into the teams. And once that was there, I was able to do some sort of workshops.
So what was the entry point? I'm curious about it. Like what got you there, and what was that entry point?
A product owner needed help. That's great. That's something that I think you can deal with as a Scrum Master. You have some ready to go tools and questions in place. And they had taken on a new product within that company, and they were always working really in a data-driven kind of way. And he wanted to make sense. It was a he. He wanted to make sense of how to move forward, also with an impending deadline somewhere down the line at the end of the quarter or something like that. And he had heard that there was an agile coach. That was my title there, and he thought, okay, I can make use of that. So once that had happened, with that particular team, I could really do some work that meant that there was an openness to sharing questions and trying things out, creating artifacts together, and then inspecting them as well. So that was a sort of a good entry point and a good follow through, or it was possible to make that follow through, but it was ultimately on way too low a level, right? So that was very specifically aimed towards something that was immediately in front of them,
and in that team only, right?
And in that team only, yeah. And there was
I think this speaks a little bit to one of the things that we don't talk too much in the Scrum Master community, which is this idea of having a setup for the engagement, right? Like, preparing the terrain, preparing the relationships, and of course creating awareness. If you had the opportunity to go back and do it again, what would you have done differently, Thomas?
Two things I want to be in place. I've thought about the same thing, and I try to do it with new engagement as well. If I were to go there again, I would want to have that explicit talk about the expectations of the people hiring me on, because it's not just an anonymous entity, a company, but it's always a couple of people that are maybe your sponsor or the person hiring you, that sort of stuff. Maybe there's a manager involved. I want to talk about what success looks like to them, so that I know which buttons to push or knobs to turn, that sort of stuff. So that needs to be in place. And secondly, following from that, I think it's important to be introduced to the people that you're going to be working with. So that you don't have to do that yourself, but that there's someone who's already in the organization that says, look, this is Thomas or Pasco or whoever, right? And they are here to do X by Y. And that can be wrong, right? And you can deviate from that starting point, but then at least you have that entry point, so that you don't have to have the conversation with everyone that you're talking to about, okay, what are you going to do? Why are you here? Should I take you into account or not? That sort of stuff. But to align those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you mentioned something there that I think is critical. I want to highlight. It's of course highlighting the expectations. I think it's a great learning and something that everyone should take away from this. Not only if you're a freelancer, but also as a Scrum Master in an organization, entering a new team or entering a new part of the organization, whatever that might be. But the other part that you mentioned, which I think is really important, is to be introduced by an insider, right? Like be introduced by someone who's already been there, who is known, and of course, hopefully, also has the credibility and the clout to make the introduction stick, right? Like
yes.
that is not a person that everybody is trying hard to ignore, but rather that is a person that everybody pays attention to. Normally, that would be the head of R&D or the head of a department or even the CEO, depending on the size of the organization. But I think that's really critical. And for me, this is critical no matter whether you're a freelancer, a contractor, or an employee. Like that starting point, that contract that you get with the team, but also with the stakeholders is extremely important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I saw it also in a different client a couple of years later where I was there on an interim basis. I was not really introduced, and that made it easy for people that I worked with to sort of unify my message with myself and put both aside as a result. And then the person that followed me also didn't receive that introduction, at least not while I was still there. I mentioned it to the manager, but that really helps set the stage for the engagement of that person with the rest of the team or the teams that they have to work with. And they were just an internal, they were an internal employee. I didn't mean to say just, but that works. Regardless. It works
for all kinds of engagement, whether it's an outside or an inside job. All right, Thomas, That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that and the lessons you took from it.
All right, thank you.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.